Welcome back to another video, basically telling you what are the strengths and weaknesses of Trump's potential vice presidential nominee for 2024. We're also going to address how they affect the 2024 map. Exactly what swing state do they help and where do they hurt? Let's break it down. So, of course, we have an empty map here, but what you'll notice right off the bat is that whoever the VP nominee is will not affect X amount of states. You could say about 40 states will not change their coloration by the basis of whoever Trump picks. Let's get to those states. So I can pretty much guarantee you that any VP candidate will not affect any of the blue or red states right now. As you can see, it's virtually tied with about 100 toss-up electoral votes. You need 270 to win. You can see that Biden's about 50 away. You can see that Trump's about 62 away. So let's get right into the list. So starting off, if you guys remember, the last bit of sauce I gave you was about Marco Rubio and JD Vance, okay? So that was the last update. That last video was April 17th, so 26 days later, I don't know. Basically, we have this new Noem update, okay? So Kristi Noem was one of these top 5 contenders for the VP nomination. Now, considering some factors, okay, chief among them, she's the right age. I think she's like about 50 years old. So she's your mom's age. She's my mom's age, but believe it or not, she's also pretty attractive. Again, photogenic. Now, is she good for the suburbs? That's like what you're penciling in her. Slot 4 being justified as, but when you look at it, you see this girl, and I think that she more or less is governing a state like South Dakota, which is known for being very conservative, and so that doesn't really help Donald Trump because again, we're not looking for somebody electorally, that is more conservative than Donald Trump. Now, what's brutal about Kristi Noem in particular is that she actually made a book, and by she, I mean she authorized the book to be made that would have boosted her status. So as we all know, most politicians, in anticipation for running for president or something along those lines, will release a book, oftentimes not written by themselves, but co-authored by somebody else or ghostwritten, as a lot of Drake people know about. That being said, though, it's not a big deal. You know, Mike Pence probably did it. Vivek Ramaswamy, before he ran like 2 years ago, that was the same deal. Now, here's the difference, though. The difference is that she left out a ton of stuff and added a ton of stuff that was really bad. So she has some scandals on her back, okay? So, of course, are you going to mention something like having an affair with Corey Lewandowski, who was an influential Trump guy like 8 years ago? Most likely not. Are you going to include a meeting with Kim Jong-un, even though that probably didn't happen? Yeah, okay, so you can see how there's already cracks in the foundation. Now, here's the thing. She must have not been confident about her chances of being the presidential basically backup selection, because why would she embellish in her book and lie when she knows that she could have been caught in a lie, when in reality, when you look at it, if she was so confident about being the selection, then she would have just went ahead with the truth. Obviously, you don't have to fudge on your resume if you're a Harvard grad going for McDonald's fry cook, but here we are at last, and you see Noem, and she's lying. And look at some details. So beyond even the North Korean spectacle, she's got an untrainable and dangerous 14-month-old puppy named Cricket that she turned her gun on. No, that then turned her gun on one of her nasty and mean goats. The Guardian reported after obtaining an advance copy of the book, Not Going Back, The Truth and What's Going On in Politics and How We Move America Forward, drawing bipartisan outrage and effectively tanking her VP chances. So she killed her puppy. Now, could you argue the justification? Like, obviously, sometimes you need to put the dog down, okay? Euthanasia. But that being said, to shoot him yourself is kind of odd. And you're like a woman and you're killing your dog. Like, wouldn't you get like your husband to do it? Was she even married at that point? Could you get your dad to do it? Your brother? Who knows? Look, if I had a sister or something like that and the dog had to be put down, I would rather do that than have her do it. But that being said, she did it. Now, that's a little odd. That's a little odd. Okay, anyway, that's a bad look. And again, suburban mom vote. Okay, well, do most suburban moms put down their dog? They're going to think that's gross. Anyhow, moving on. So when we look at Kristi Noem as an electoral candidate, we see that if Trump were to select her, she would secure South Dakota. Well, not even that. So when we look at people that are advocating for Kristi Noem on the basis of helping out in the 24 election, we have to look at the facts, okay? So she ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in South Dakota. Now, if you're running in 2010, which, by the way, was a red wave. So looking at that fact, you ought to win the state by like let's say at least 15 percentage points at the national level. Now, South Dakota, she ended up winning by 2%, even though she outraised her opponent, okay? So it wasn't even a fluke circumstance. So in a red wave, she was able to defeat Democrat Seth Sandlin by only 2%. That is terrible. I mean, that's like if the prime New England Patriots beat the Cleveland Browns back in the 0-16 era. by like a point. Okay. I mean, that's just really tragic, even though you won. Now, let's move on to the next election. You see 2012. Even here, she's only winning by about 14. That's not remarkable when you look at it that way. And then if you look at these election results, 2014 and 16, you look at these, and what you'll notice is that, look, I mean, I'm taking a stab in the dark. Watch. So I haven't even looked this up, but oftentimes when you look at an election and you don't even have a portrait for the person in the opposition, that means that it was just a stand-in, okay? You know, like when a Republican has to run in Oregon or something and you know you're going to lose, so they just put in some wacko that probably thinks he has a chance and then he ends up with 30% of the vote count. That's Karina Robinson, okay? So, oh my God, guys, she won by 30. Okay, but who was the opponent? Oh yeah, there's no picture. There's no picture. Like, what the hell? So these election results don't even matter. These weren't even contested, basically. So these elections were a formality, obviously in South Dakota in 2016. But even looking forwards to 2018, that gubernatorial election, okay? So you look at that. Oh my God, Lalo is a blue wave. Okay, it doesn't matter. You look at Billy Sutton, and he lost by a mere 3.4% in South Dakota. That doesn't make sense, okay? A state that Trump won by a ton, and she only won by 3. Now, 2022, obviously, red wave, she won by 27. But again, it's one of those things where it's a formality vote at that point. And so when it was actually contested and the people of South Dakota actually had a really well-funded election, you saw that the Democrats almost beat her. Okay, so she is not good electorally. And if she's not having an easy time winning South Dakota at the contested level, then I don't see her helping out in suburban Georgia, suburban Arizona, suburban Pennsylvania, whatever have you. Now, over here, we have an equivocating answer by J.D. Vance here saying that he's never spoken to Trump about being vice president, which is a very lawyerly way of saying that, no, I technically might have not have. But listen, the point is that the guy's name has been floating around. Now, what do we have to know about this man? So if we look at him, all right, so if we look at J.D. Vance, you'll notice that the guy is about 40 years old. He has military experience, which is a good thing for the ticket. It hardly matters, though, at the VP level. That being said, though, we have a guy who doesn't have a lot of experience. Now, you could say he has some relevant experience, you know, growing up white trash and how like that represents obviously the plight with the Biden economy. But the way that JD kind of comes off doesn't really emanate that. And so when you're looking at it that way, I don't think that factors in. That being said, though, of course, we have a guy who worked for Peter Thiel or kind of like that. And beyond that, he had this Hillbilly Elegy book. That's a good thing to have as your repertoire. That being said, the implication in Trump getting a guy under 40 is to say that this guy will be my successor come 2029. And the truth is that that is in contention if Trump wants that to be the case. It's a very big ask. And so we really do have a dueling set of premises where on one hand, you want somebody younger than Trump because obviously Trump is not a spring chicken, as a white guy would say, but also he is looking for a successor maybe, or maybe he isn't. And the reason why I give that caveat is because, of course, somebody like Donald Trump is going to want somebody who he can handpick in 2028 as of like, let's say you have a primary with 10 guys. He wants to be able to endorse that 1 out of 10. He doesn't want to, you know, like date the first girl that says yes to him to dance at the prom. Okay. He doesn't want to be stuck with that girl. He wants to, you know, kind of look around for 5 minutes. And, you know, you don't want to end up the guy by the wall having no women, but you also want to not end up with Becky. And so when you're looking at it that way, is JD Vance a Becky? We have to ascertain some more facts. Okay. So when we look at his electoral history, we only have one election to really look into. That's going to be the 2022 election in the midterm in the state of Ohio. So in terms of how JD impacts the election results for Trump, I'd say it's about the same. The truth is that he's probably one of the few people on the short list that would be more conservative than Donald Trump. Now, you could argue the validity of that statement, of course, because Donald Trump is definitely pretty stalwart in his not beliefs, but just the way he acts on impulse. That being said, though, of course, JD has this more methodical way of thinking of things, which is not too dissimilar from Ron DeSantis, but more in the populist vein of Republican thought. Also, you have to keep in mind that JD Vance has a controversy that the Democrats will certainly play into. This Achilles heel, by the way, is going to be JD Vance's anti-Trump statements as of like 10 years ago when he was an Obama simp. And while that is super cringe, and again, the guy was like 30 when he said this, again, I'm 21 as of yesterday, so I would not be caught dead endorsing Obama. That being said, of course, we have a guy in JD who can repent of his sins. He recently became a Catholic, and to like half the country, that might piss you off a little bit. I'm Protestant. But that being said, it seems like maybe that's like a good pivot point to say like, okay, I became Catholic. I became more conservative, pro-life. Now I support Trump. You could dissuade people that are going to be like, oh, you're disloyal by using that. Also, keep in mind there's some additives to this. So when you look at Peter Thiel, again, big venture capitalist, we're looking at a guy who basically has billions of dollars, and he supports I wouldn't say a niche Republican faction, but he definitely has some favorites. And one of those is JD Vance. Another one is Blake Masters. If you can get more money to fundraise and by the tune of tens of millions by Peter Thiel via picking JD Vance, that might be a worthwhile venture for Donald Trump to secure the presidency, with obviously the thorn on his side being that, you're kind of freaking stuck with JD if he runs for president in 2028. And then also keep in mind that you're asking him to resign from the Senate. So if Donald Trump says, like, okay, look, I might pick you for VP, but I'm not going to endorse you, I'm not promising you that in 2028. But would you really resign the Senate for that, or would you rather just stay in the Senate and then wait until 28 and then run against whoever Trump picks? So, for example, let's say Trump picks Doug Burgum. Do you think that you would rather have JD stay in the Senate and then fight Burgum one-on-one, or would you rather him resign on the Senate and then just pray to God that Trump likes him enough 5 years later? It's a really big question for JD. And so you might even ask, will even, even join on the ticket? And I don't even know. Also, when we look at the electoral consequences, just in a more particular sense, so he might add millions of dollars in fundraising, which is also very appreciated. But you also have to keep in mind that beyond that fact, we have to look at the one election sample we have here. In 22, where Trump won the state by about 10% 2 years prior, you saw Tim Ryan go against, of course, JD Vance. JD Vance beat him by about 6%. Okay, so that's a little bit of an underperformance. Keep in mind, Tim Ryan was a good candidate. He had a ton of money. And so I think this is about the average result. If you do the whole Doctor Strange thing where he's like, I visualize 1,000 scenarios and we only win in one. You visualize 1,000 scenarios, and the most commonplace one, the median result, is JD Vance winning Ohio against a strong opponent, well-funded opponent by about 6. I think that's completely fine. So electorally, I don't think he helps Trump at all. Like I think it's a non-factor. So the 2 sentence explanation for JD Vance is to say that he probably won't affect the election result either way strongly, in that it's even a big ask for him to resign from the Senate. So I don't think he's likely to be picked. That being said, it's a meh for me. Okay, so looking at Doug Burgum as the next guy. Doug Burgum has heightened interest. Obviously, he's been hyped around the last about 2 weeks, I would say. Now, let's see what the pitch is for the layperson, okay? Burgum's name has been repeatedly in recent weeks been brought up as somebody who has little baggage and the ability to attract moderate voters. So if we know Doug Burgum for anything, is that he's known for being kind of old. He has basically the experience of a former executive for Microsoft. And now a lot of, you could say far right, but a lot of people will be like, oh my God, he was friends with Bill Gates. Look, we need to stop pocket watching, playa hating, okay? I mean, if you're working for Microsoft 15 years ago, of course you're going to know Bill Gates. And would you not take up that job? What, are you broke? So that question is kind of thrown out the window, in my opinion. And look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump was friends with Jeffrey Epstein prior to, obviously, what happened. And so are you going to hate on Donald Trump for that? No, because when you're a billionaire, you meet a ton of people. It's fine. And you work with a lot of people, and they turn out to be, globalist. Oh my God, are you going to cry? And so I don't think this is a deal breaker, but for some very, very, very French people on Twitter, that might be an issue. Anyway, we have a couple of elections to refer to just to see how strong he is. Now, 2016 is a good result in North Dakota, which is not impressive, but he still won by about, looks like 56%, which is incredible. Not because, oh my God, you won North Dakota, but by the margin you did and by cleaning up. I mean, this is like, again, like if Tom Brady in 2007 beat the 0-16 Browns by 60-0 and threw 5 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, threw for 400 yards. Now, is it remarkable you beat the Browns? No, but the way you did it was definitely impressive, okay? It means that you've got fundraising capability. It means that you're thorough. It means you have a work ethic to campaign and get the endorsements and shake the right hands, okay? So that's great. Now, we refer to 2020, which should be closer, and he still won by 40, okay? So not bad at all. So great guy electorally. Now, when it comes to the age question, that's an important detail because he's 67. Now, in my opinion, if I were 67 and you said be Trump's understudy for 4 years, when you're 71, you can run for president yourself. A lot of people will say, well, Doug Burgum's old, he won't run. But you're underestimating people's ambition, okay? Because obviously, Donald Trump is 76 or something, and he's still running. Joe Biden's 80 and he's still running. You think a guy, even if he's 70, won't get the chance to get a prime stake and stab at being president? I would do it. So for him to not be in contention for running in 28 is stupid. Do you think a guy really wants to work with Bill Gates, want to be governor, and then end up vice president for Donald Trump for a term and then just bow out? I don't think so. And so this whole thing of like, oh, well, he's too weak. I don't know. It's a really tough thing. It's a really tough thing. And even the last time we saw something like this was probably Dick Cheney and George Bush, where Dick Cheney was older than George. And so it was pretty obvious, like, hey, you're not going to run in 08, plus you suck anyway. So that was clear. But that was when George Bush was younger than Dick Cheney, whereas Trump is older than Doug Burgum by about a decade. And so it's a very awkward fit. So Doug Burgum electorally, I think, would probably moderately help Trump, if not only for the fact that he's pretty inoffensive writ large. I think electorally he's been strong. And that being said, does he have like, oozing charisma? No. Which might compliment himself as being like the straight guy to the Trump, kind of bombastic personality. That being said, though, he is rich. He has connections that could help Trump immensely. You could talk about JD being connected to one billionaire, but what if you have a billionaire in Burgum, but also beyond that, more around him? And so that's a very interesting sort of thing. So funding is stronger for Trump if that's the case. In fact, I think Burgum would help more than JD Vance, just a little bit. Now, I don't think he'd be conclusively better, but when we're looking at suburbs, I think a 67-year-old white guy, rich guy, I think that would fit in a little bit better with the suburbs than does Donald Trump even. It's kind of like if you were to blend Mitt Romney and Trump into a person, it would be a rich guy like Burgum, basically. So that's the electoral consequence. I don't see, again, he's from North Dakota, so I don't see any bleed over in any state that's important. It's not like he has a bunch of clout in Minnesota anyway. And so no swing state should be impacted by the selection of Doug Burgum. Here we have Kari Lake. So Trump eliminated Arizona candidate Kari Lake from his shortlist, which is true, citing 5 unnamed sources. That's completely in line with reality. Obviously, she would have to resign from like the Senate or resign from a race, which I don't see her doing. And even beyond that, again, she has the support of Trump, basically, and then minus a couple people that don't like her. So it's like you're endorsed by somebody minus the people that don't like you. And so when you're looking at it that way, Trump is going to struggle to win on his own. And so if you have somebody who's even less popular, that's just asinine. It'd be like if Trump picked Sarah Palin, basically. Almost. So no, of course not. That'd be terrible. That'd be terrible. Okay, Rubio. So Rubio in particular is another big one. Rubio would probably help in certain cases, okay? So when we're looking at suburbs are looking for people that are going to be of the ilk of Marco. We're looking at Hispanics. That would ever so slightly help, okay? Because to be completely honest, if you go up to a Mexican who hates Joe Biden but says Donald Trump is racist, Holmes, oh my God, he's going to deport my ass. And then you say, well, actually, Marco Rubio. A really dumb Mexican would probably be like, yeah, that's okay. And I am Mexican, I get to say that. But the truth is that anybody with their wits are going to say, well, Marco Rubio's Cuban. That's not the same thing at all. His people probably got citizenship through illegally going to Florida from Cuba in the first place, whereas the illegals from Mexico don't get that same right, which is bullshit, by the way. But even beyond that, Marco Rubio is like a light-skinned white passing. And by the way, if you look into Marco Rubio, he wasn't even like poor. He was from a upper middle class Cuban family who fled prior to Castro, I think. And so, I mean, this whole like pro-Hispanic narrative probably won't help past like the very surface level Marco Rubio. Oh, he can speak Spanish in a dialect that is different from the Mexicans, by the way, which is the vote you want, not the freaking Venezuelans or the Puerto Ricans or the Colombians or the Cubans in Florida. That state's already locked in. So we're looking at Tejanos in Texas, but in particular Mexicans in Arizona, Nevada. Okay, Marco Rubio will help just slightly, but if we're really gonna push it, oh, he's going to really shift the vote. No, he's not. The Hispanic vote will probably go up by like 1 or 2% if we pick Rubio, which is probably more of an impact on the election than any of the other people I previously mentioned, but it's not impressive. Now, that being said, of course, we've got Georgia, let's say, which is a neighbor state of Florida. Do you think he would appeal in suburbs? Maybe a little bit, but it's not like he's the best. So that's my opinion. Also, he would have to resign from a Senate seat or have Trump move, which is probably not that difficult of an ask, actually. Tim Scott. Now, Trump called at a fundraiser Tim Scott an unbelievable campaign surrogate, okay? And my bad, okay? Burgum's only worth 100 milli. Okay, my bad. He's broke. Anyway, so if you look here, Tim Scott, just very unimpressive, okay? If you're going to be the VP, why would he call you an unbelievable campaign surrogate? That's not really the sort of thing you would say. It's like if you said, it's like, I don't know why I came up with this example, but it's like if you were going to make your maid and you were going to like promote her and you're like, you're a great cleaner. I mean, that's not really like you would say you're a great organizer. Maybe I should make you my secretary. You wouldn't say, you really clean that cabinet well. That's not really the preemptive thing to kind of get an upgrade in position. And so, Tim Scott, you are a great glazer. In fact, you are so good at glazing, it kind of rubbed off on your head, and that's why it's spick and span, and it's hairless because you're glazing. It's fucking waxed. And you know what? Tim Scott is not going to be the nominee, I'm pretty sure. And if you elected Tim Scott, he would be really bad because Tim Scott sucks ass. Like guys, look up the Buckeye mascot for the gas stations in Texas. You're going to get what he looks like if you don't know what he looks like already. And Tim Scott, personally, is just not a good speaker. He is black, and so you might say that might help with the minority vote, which is somewhat important, but you have to realize that shifting a little bit of the white vote is actually more tantamount to success than is shifting the black vote by like 3%. And keep in mind that when we're talking about a black guy, we're talking about like Obama, who, even though he was half black, half white, was charismatic, and people wanted him to be black. Whereas with Tim Scott, they're like, who the fuck is this? And he acts white, and not white as in like, oh, he's proper and in a demeaning way, but it's just to say he's like corny, and he's just weak sauce, he's not cool. If you want a cool black Republican, you got to look at somebody like Mark Robinson, who actually has like that Southern preacher kind of bombastic kind of energy, which people can like in Atlanta. But what you won't like is Tim Scott talking like this, and he like, I really love Donald Trump. I loves me some Donald Trump. That is really, really stupid. Okay. So, as the great Red Eagle Politics said, by the way, friend of the show, he said Tim Scott would be working at McDonald's if he weren't black. And it's true, because the guy has no sauce. And honestly, Lindsey Graham ought to be working in the drive-thru with him, because Lindsey Graham sucks as well. In double meaning with the sucks, by the way. So in summary, Tim Scott is not going to help at all on the ticket. And even beyond that, Tim Scott definitely is not from a state that's even pertinent. And you could say, well, South Carolina is close to North Carolina, but North Carolina is not a victory you need. And what I mean is that if you need North Carolina, you're screwed anyway, okay? Like, if you're struggling to finish your bachelor's degree, don't even think about law school, son, because you're not going to make it, okay? So if you're not even going to just breeze by North Carolina, you're not going to make it for President Donald John Trump. And so do not worry about, oh my God, he can campaign in Charlotte. Shut up. Nobody cares, bro. So he is a liability. I'm telling you now. Now, speaking of liabilities, on May 11th, which was a couple days ago, Trump denied a report that his one-time challenger, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who was also on the board of Boeing, hopefully not on a plane of Boeing, because so anyway, looking at it, she is not under consideration, but I wish her well, says Trump on Truth Social, which made him very rich. If you look at him here, if Trump were to pick Nikki Haley, which he already said he won't, would it help? Now, there is actually a contrarian position to be had here, okay? So, of course, Nikki Haley would probably, now this is very tepid, okay? There was a niche of people who voted for Nikki Haley who did not like Trump over traditional Republicans in the lamest sense of the word, okay? That being said, okay, these people that were Nikki Haley supporters were saying, well, I would vote Republican if it were anybody but Trump. So if Trump makes Haley his running mate, then the conclusion would be like, oh, they're going to vote for me. Answer is obviously not. That would just defeat the purpose. It's like saying, I'll date this ugly chick as long as she's a virgin. But then it's like, okay, well, if she's not a virgin, you would still pick her because like you already picked her before. But the only logic was that one variable. And so obviously, if you take that away, it ruins the whole premise. And so that very niche support of Nikki Haley voters in the primary were contingent on her not being with Trump, obviously. So if it's like Trump Haley, they're not going to vote for Trump Haley. They're going to vote for Biden or just sit it out or RFK. So this whole notion of, oh my God, Nikki Haley can help. No. You could argue in 2020, had he swapped out Mike Pence for Haley, it might have helped him in the suburbs. And you could argue that, but that's for another time. That being said, right now, if you were to pick Haley, he would lose support by a little bit. With strong Republicans, they'd be like, what the is he doing? And I don't think he'd get any crossover vote either. And so it would just be a disaster. Even worse than Tim Scott. Okay? So just a little addendum towards the end of the video. On my birthday, apparently JD Vance was the first rumored VP pick to show up at Trump's trial, lamenting the psychological torture he said that Trump was enduring inside the dingy courtroom in a tweet. And he was also calling out the daughter of the judge for consulting a firm that works with the Democratic candidates, okay? So think about that. Trump is not even allowed to do that due to a gag order imposed by the judge, which, by the way, is BS in my opinion. That being said, of course, it kind of shows that he is probably, if he's not likely to be the VP, he's actually really going like on that because he's really glazing Trump to leave the Senate, or I don't know if they're on recess, but basically going out of his way, flying from, let's say, Ohio or DC to New York and saying like, okay, look, Donald, I'm right here. I'm gonna do the dirty work of dissing the daughter of the judge because you have a gag order against you. That's like homie time, okay? Okay, that's sus. I'm just saying, like, obviously that's like your best friend. Like, hey, yo, Doc, can you do something because I legally can't do it? Like, that's definitely close. So either he's desperately doing favors for Trump to be VP, or he's already there. We don't know. But that actually increases his stock by a lot, in my opinion. So that's interesting. That's definitely interesting. Okay, now, by the way, the source I had a couple weeks ago said it was between Vance and Rubio. So keyed, okay? Anyhow, so in 14, so today actually, so Trump's former GOP challengers, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum and biotech engineer Vivek Ramaswamy, along with his top surrogates Byron Donalds, are all on the list, okay? And they all traveled actually to support Trump at the second day of his testimony. Whoa, that's crazy. Okay, so they all went. Okay, so that kind of removes a little bit of the flair from JD Vance actually. So it opens it right back up. That being said, let's consult two last people on this list. Okay, so we're going to look at, for instance, Vivek Ramaswamy, and we're also going to look at Byron Donalds. So one reason why it won't be Byron Donalds, in my opinion, is because he's from Florida. And so a lot of that electoral prestige obviously contradicts with the electoral law. And so he would have to resign from the Senate and move to become VP, which is a huge ask, obviously, because then his career is over, basically, if he does that and he doesn't win vice president. That being said, of course, we've got a guy in Vivek who doesn't have that same issue. Now Vivek is interesting because Vivek is like more of Trump, and so that's not exactly what you want. And even beyond that, again, same problem with JD Vance, where you're asking for your successor to be your VP at that point when he's that young, and so that's another issue. Vivek, although is different from JD because he might be electorally better as a surrogate because, like, for example, who's more likely to have like more than 1,000 people show up at a Vivek rally or at a JD Vance rally? So think about it that way. You know, you could actually have it be notable that Vivek is going to Wisconsin, Vivek is going to Atlanta, Vivek is going to North Carolina. That's actually significant. Whereas if it's like JD Vance doing it, I don't see those crowds being as big. And so that might actually factor into the logic of Trump, who thinks very much in crowd size. That's a little niche there. Now, even beyond that point, by the way, folks, we've got a guy in Vivek who's a way better speaker than JD Vance, in my opinion. And he honestly is probably like one of the best political speakers right now. That being said, as Ann Coulter said, he is Indian. And while people won't say that counts against him, it just generally does, okay? And so it's like an under the rug issue that a lot of people that are Indian will be discriminated against because people just don't like that because he's foreign and whatnot. And it's not even that he's foreign. It's not even that he's brown, but it's just that it's a specific type that people don't like, and that he's Hindu and that he's vegetarian. Because you take me, for example, and I think most white people would be cool with me versus Vivek. Like if you had the average Republican voter and you said, okay, you want Lalo to be your president or you want Vivek Ramaswamy, okay? The answer is going to be me almost every time, just going off of like the phenotype. Again, not his fault, okay? I like Vivek, but it's just the fact of the matter. You had an old racist lady like Ann Coulter be like, I like you very much and I basically agree with you on everything, but you're brown. Like, dude, what the fuck? Like, imagine dealing with that as Vivek, okay? And that's basically the consideration for Trump too. I have no doubt in my mind that Trump has at one point has been like, Vivek, if you were white, you'd be the president already. It's like, bro, come on. Damn, it's tough. So I mean, I'd say Vivek and JD have about the same appeal, just that I feel like JD is probably, I'm sorry, Biden moment. I think that Vivek is probably a slightly better surrogate because he's more likely to have rallies. And you know what Trump can do even with Vivek? He can say like, you know what? Vivek, I want you to go on all the TV shows. Instead of Trump calling into CNN or whatever, it can be Vivek, you know, basically sweeping it up for Donald on the campaign trail. And then, hey, Vivek, go to North Carolina. Vivek, go to Georgia, go to Florida, go to the places where I think I'm going to win anyway, but just make sure I get them, okay? So I can see that. Whereas with JD, it's not as persuasive as a sell. So that's the electoral respect. At the end of the day, in conclusion, I personally think that none of the VP choices for Trump will make much of a difference in the election result. In fact, whoever he picks for vice president is going to have like a 3 to 5% difference on the actual result. And by that, I mean like the odds of him winning. So right now, Donald Trump has odds of winning at about, I would say personally, at like 75 to 85%. Let's say Trump's at 80. Trump picks the worst candidate. His odds go from 80 to about 76. Okay. If he picks the right guy, it goes up to like 82. So realistically speaking, it doesn't really matter. He's in the lead. He's already a very polarizing figure. So whoever he picks won't matter that much. What matters more to me personally is the calculus as to who's going to be the successor in the next term. But we're going to see that more so in the future. So I'll see y'all. After you like the video, you're going to be dismissed. And after you subscribe, you will be dismissed. And I'll see y'all on the next one. Adios.